This video is going to cover the topic of what I call the butterfly method. Be sure the date and topic are at the top of your page. The essential question for the video will be, how can we use this butterfly method to work with percents? Now remember, we've worked with percents in various capacities. We have found the percent, right? That's how we started, right? By finding the percent. This is when we know the part, right? 10 out of the whole out of 15, and we want to figure out what percent value that is, right? So we've done that before. We've also been able to find the part. This is when we know the whole, right? So we know all the sixth graders, and we know the percent of them who do a certain activity, and we want to know how many kids that is equivalent to, right? How many actual kids that is. And lastly, we've been able to find the original whole. And this is when we knew the percent, and we knew how much the part was that was represented by that percent, but we didn't know the total that we had to start with. Right? So these are the three different ways, and I want you to make sure that you have all of these written down in your notes for reference. I know some of you guys have been kind of skimming when these are long passages to write, but it's very likely you'll want to reference these as we work more with this topic. So I should see all of this written in your journal when I check your homework. In all of these examples, we were able to use equivalent ratios set up like this to find what we are looking for. And in all of them, we set up with the part on top, the whole on the bottom, and the percent out of 100 on the right-hand side. Sometimes the math was more obvious than others, and sometimes it was easier than others, right? I want to share a strategy with you that many of you will use next year, and it's one that I really like, and I call it the butterfly method. The butterfly method is great. It works for all of the types of problems that we've worked before, but it only works if you're careful with your setup. If you set it up incorrectly, you'll get your answer wrong every time, right? The setup is really important here. And there's one thing I want to show you about the butterfly method before we begin to use it. So I'm just going to show you a quick little example. Let's take a look at this equivalent ratio, right? We all know 1/2 is the same as 2/4. Right? But what you may not have noticed before is that if you multiply this 2 times 2, you get 4. And if you multiply this 1 times 4, you also get 4. Right? And this is always true for ratios. When you multiply the diagonals, the product is always the same. This is always true for equivalent fractions or ratios, right? So let's see, 2/3 I know is the same as 6/9, right? And if I look at my diagonals, 3 times 6 is 18, 9 times 2 is also 18, right? The product is always the same. I call this the butterfly method because when I loop the pairs together, they kind of look like butterfly wings, right? Here's the rest of the butterfly here, and here's the rest of the butterfly here, right? Kind of, you have to look carefully, right? My art is not perfect, but you get the idea. It's kind of like a butterfly. So how can this help us with percents? Well, with percents, we're always setting up an equivalent ratio, and we always know 3 out of the 4 parts, right? So maybe we know that 5 out of 10 is some percent out of 100, right? Well, we can use the butterfly method to figure that out if it's not an obvious answer for us, right? So I know that this 5 times 100 is 500, and this 10 times something also has to be 500. So if I were working backwards, I would say, 10 times something is 500, but another way to think about that would be 500 divided by 10, which would get me my answer. And it would tell me my mystery number here was supposed to be 50, right? So it's 50%. So the general gist of the butterfly method is that you can use what you've multiplied by the two numbers across from each other that you know to figure out the one that doesn't have a pair. The way to think about it is to multiply the two numbers that are paired together and then divide by the third number, the one that doesn't yet have a pair, to figure out what its pair should be. Let's look at this in action. Let's take our first example, right? So in this example, I know that it is 10 out of 15 people, the part and the whole, but what I don't know is the percent out of 100, right? And this is why the setup is so important. If you put any of these numbers in the wrong spot, the butterfly method isn't effective, right? But here I could say, okay, well, I'm going to multiply 10 times 100, and then whatever I get there, I'm going to then divide by the third number, which is 15. So 10 times 100 is 1,000. And if I divide it by 15, I'll get 66, well, and 2/3, or 6 repeating percent. And I've been able to find my value pretty quickly. I didn't have to think about how many times 15 went into 100. I was able to say, okay, well, I know the value of this 10 times 100 has to be the same as 15 times my mystery number, and this is how I can figure it out. In our second example, right, we knew that there were 200 kids total. So remember, this is part to whole. The whole was 200. And they represented 40 out of 100, or 40%, right? And sometimes I know this mystery number really easily, but if I don't, right, I can do 40 times 200, and I know that has to be the same as 100 times my mystery number. So I can do 200 times 40, and then divide that by my third number of 100. Of course, that would be 8,000, and then I have to figure out what my mystery number is, and I would divide, and I would find out that my mystery number was 800 kids are in, 80 kids are in art, right? So there's my butterfly method, making it just a little bit faster for me. And in the last example that we had to start the video, right, we know that someone got a 90%, so 90 out of 100, and by doing that, the part that they got right was 15, but we don't know how many the total is. We don't know the whole number of questions, right? So again, butterfly method, these two are looped together, so I can multiply 15 by 100, and I know that that has to be the same as 90 times my mystery number. So I can do 15 times 100, and whatever I get there, I can divide it by my third number. And in this case, it's not really a very good real-life example, because I would get 1,500, I would divide that by 90, and it doesn't work out very nicely. It actually ends up being 16 2/3, right? Or 6 repeating, 16 2/3 questions, which would in real life be kind of strange, right? You can't have a partial question on a test. But that just goes to show that even when the numbers aren't friendly, we can use this strategy to find our values. So remember, the essential question of this video was how we could use what I call the butterfly method to work with percents. It's a great strategy. It will always work, but it only works if we set up our ratios correctly. So always remember that our ratios must be part over whole, and that has to be equivalent to your percent out of 100. Sorry, that's a little messy. My pen's being a little wonky today. We'll practice this in class, right? And again, this is something you'll do a lot of next year. It's not a strategy you have to use, but I find it really friendly and easy to use with percents.